Okay, so a congressional hearing that was supposed to be about the Jeffrey Epstein files just completely blew up. We're talking a full-on confrontation, accusations of a massive cover-up, mishandling of super-sensitive data, and some really personal attacks. So how did a hearing about transparency turn into total chaos? Yeah, let's get into it. I mean, to really get the vibe in that room, you just have to hear this one line from Congressman Thomas Massie. He wasn't just saying, hey, a mistake was made. No, he was basically alleging a cover-up that he thinks is bigger than Watergate. The stakes were set that high, right from the get-go.
All right, so to really understand what happened, here's how we're going to break it down. First, we'll set the scene. Then, we'll dig into the three big accusations that Congressman Massie threw at the Department of Justice. And finally, we'll look at how the whole thing just completely unraveled into a shouting match.
So this was supposed to be a pretty standard hearing, just checking in on the DOJ's compliance with the Epstein Files Transparency Act. But it became obvious really fast that this was not going to be a simple progress report. The real question became, was this whole thing a massive failure by the DOJ, or were these just, some minor procedural hiccups along the way?
Congressman Massie showed up ready to argue his massive failure point. He brought 3 specific documents with him. He used these to try and build a case that the DOJ wasn't just being sloppy, he was arguing they were actively hiding information. And in the process, he claimed they were actually harming victims.
Okay, so his first piece of evidence, it's pretty shocking. It all boils down to a single email. An email that was supposed to do the exact opposite of what he claims it did. It was meant to protect the identities of Epstein's survivors.
So the claim is pretty simple, but really serious. Lawyers for the victims apparently sent the DOJ a list of survivor names that were explicitly not to be made public. But instead of keeping that list private, the allegation is that the DOJ went and released the entire email, putting those very names out there for everyone to see.
And this is the detail that really lit the fuse. Massie points out that, look, the DOJ clearly looked at this document. How do we know? Because they blacked out the lawyers' names. So the argument is, if you redacted the lawyers' names, how in the world did you leave the victims' names, the most sensitive info on the entire page, completely exposed?
And this really gets to the human cost of this alleged mistake. Massie drove this point home hard, saying that because of this release, these survivors, many of whom fought to stay anonymous, were now getting unwanted phone calls. Just awful. All right, the second accusation flips the script. It's not about what was exposed, but what was hidden. This time, the whole fight was over one specific, very high-profile name that was allegedly scrubbed from a key document.
So check this out. On the left, you see the document title the DOJ first put out, Child Sex Trafficking Co-Conspirators. And then, just a big black bar. Nothing. But on the right, this is what appeared after Massie's team supposedly called them on it. The name Les Wexner is suddenly there. The implication was pretty clear. A name that was right there under the title Co-Conspirator was, at least for a time, hidden from public view.
And this is where you get 2 totally different stories. Congressman Massie framed it as, I caught you red-handed, but Attorney General Bondi's side presented it as a quick fix, arguing that Wexner's name was put back in within 40 minutes. The suggestion there is that it was just a simple mistake, not some big conspiracy.
Okay, Massie's third and final piece of evidence took aim at the FBI's own interview notes. He basically described a situation with layers of redactions that he called intentional obstruction.
But first, we got to know what an FD 302 form is. Super simple. It's the official summary an FBI agent writes up after an interview. In a case like this, these forms are absolutely critical because they've got testimony from survivors and they could potentially name the men involved.
And this little flowchart here shows exactly what was so frustrating. Massie laid it out. A user on the DOJ's public portal would see a redacted part of a document. They'd click on it, probably thinking they'd see the underlying info, but instead, they'd just hit another redaction, a total digital dead end. He argued it was designed to make the evidence impossible to see.
So after Massie laid out all this evidence, the hearing just took a nosedive. It stopped being about documents and procedures and spiraled into straight-up personal attacks.
So in response to all these accusations, Attorney General Bondi just kind of brushes it all aside with this political shot, completely changing the subject from the Epstein files to former President Trump. And he didn't stop there. The Attorney General then brought up Massie's voting record on a totally separate issue, a bill about AI-generated deepfake porn, and called him a hypocrite. At that point, you knew the real debate was pretty much over. What came next was just pure chaos. I mean, constant interruptions, people talking over each other. All you could hear was reclaiming my time as Massie tried to get a word in. The committee chairman was just struggling to keep any kind of order at all.
And just like that, the hearing ended with zero resolution. Massie ramps up his accusations, saying this is a decades-long cover-up, and he tries to submit his evidence into the official record. But right then, at the peak of all this tension, the chairman bangs the gavel and calls a recess for votes. The session was cut short, and every single major question was just left hanging.
You know, this whole mess leaves us with a really critical question, one that goes way beyond this one crazy hearing. In an age where we have these transparency acts, what does accountability even look like if the documents we get are full of errors, redacted to the point of being useless, or worse, they end up exposing the very people they're supposed to protect? It's a tough one.